On overnight,
I believe in reason and common sense.
Leith Van Onselen from Macro Business with a treasury of common sense.
Common sense never goes out of style.
I have Leith Van Onselen on the line. Good morning, Leith.
G'day, Mike. How are you?
I'm well, and a whole lot of stats in front of me. Let's start with the first one here. It seems like pretty comprehensively, too, Australians reject the big Australia immigration.
That's right. So a survey came out. Now, this survey gets done every year by a group called the Australian Population Research Institute, and they put together a really comprehensive survey every year. It's a representative sample of the country based on 3,000 voters across Australia. And what this year's survey, it basically surveys a whole bunch of things, but one of the things it's surveyed is voters' attitude towards immigration and the whole big Australia story.
Mm.
And the survey was undertaken in December this year, and the results obviously came out this week. And what it showed is that 49% of respondents wanted much lower or zero immigration, and that compares to 38% who favour basically the current level or somewhat smaller levels, so cuts but not significant cuts. And then there was another 13% who didn't have an opinion. And this was the strongest result against high immigration that the group has ever had. And the biggest concern amongst people, the people who voted no, or who basically don't want big Australia, was obviously housing, which is something you and I talk about almost weekly. And 71% of them agree that adding more people will push up to the cost of housing. So that's 71% of total.
Mm-hmm.
And only 9% disagree. And the real kicker here, Mike, is that in the survey, 70% of respondents said that Australia does not need more people. So this is another case of basically, the political elite basically running this high immigration policy, which isn't supported by voters. You got 71% of people don't think Australia needs more people, and just under half, 49%, say that we need big cuts, like very big cuts, or zero net overseas migration. And yet, obviously, we've got the political class forcing it down our throats. And this isn't the first survey to say this. We've had dozens and dozens of surveys over the years, which basically say that Australians don't support the huge immigration policy that has basically been shoved down our throats for 20 years.
Indeed. So apart from the politicians, who does want more immigration? Big business.
That's it. Yeah, big business and the universities now. The universities are now a massive lobbyist in favour of immigration through the international student funnel.
Yeah.
So and obviously the sort of the property sector. So you got big business, big property, the education / migration industry is what I call them now, which is basically universities and migration agents and all those sorts of mobs. And then obviously the workings within government. So you got the Australian Treasury, who we talked about previously, and basically it's this is against what the voters want, and it's also obviously the reason why I've got this absolutely disgraceful housing crisis at the moment, because too many people coming in and we don't have enough houses for them.
Well, to compound the figures that we've just discussed, it's been another bad week for housing data.
Yeah, it has, and it seems like this is Groundhog Day, doesn't it? Like, it seems like every week I just hit you with more bad housing news, and unfortunately this week has been no exception. So Domain, which is one of the big, housing data providers, released their March quarter rental report, and what it showed is that rents surged higher in March over the March quarter, and that's because of record low rental vacancy rates. And just to put some data around that, across the combined capital cities, so all the capital cities, house rents, so rents for detached houses, surged by 5% in the March quarter, which was the largest quarterly increase in 17 years and the second highest on record, to give us basically a 10.5% increase year on year. And for units, so those of you looking for apartments, they rose for a record 11th straight quarter by 3.3% in the March quarter. So it's just an absolute disaster zone where the rental crisis is just ongoing. We've got super, super high rental inflation, record low vacancy rates, and it's basically because too many people coming in, 660,000 in the year to September, which is the latest data, against, really dwindling housing supply. And just to compound the problem, Mike, and this means it's probably going to get worse, the Australian Bureau of Statistics released dwelling construction data on Wednesday. So last week, you might recall, I think we got dwelling approvals data from the ABS, which was an absolute disaster, and that delivered the lowest dwelling approvals since April 2012. So we only got 12,400 dwellings approved in February. That gives you an annualised rate of only 149,000, which is 91,000 below the Albanese government's construction target of 240,000 homes. On Wednesday, the ABS followed up with their quarterly data on dwelling commencements and completions, and only 43,100 homes were completed in Australia over the December quarter in trend terms. So that's well below the 60,000 that the Albanese government says that their target will produce. And in the year to December, so last calendar year, Australia built only 173,000 homes, which was about 67,000 below the Albanese government's targets. And just to really shove the knife in, data on dwellings that were commenced over the December quarter, there's only 37,200 homes commenced in the last quarter of 2023.
Really?
And that's the worst quarterly result since 2012.
Yeah.
And again, that's way below the Albanese government's target of 60,000 per quarter. So basically, this is an absolute disaster zone. So both dwelling approvals data and the dwelling commencements data is running at about 149,000, which again is 91,000 below the Albanese government's construction target. And this is when the population's increased by 660,000 last year, off just under 550,000 net overseas migration. So we're just not, we're not producing enough homes already. The data's getting worse. All the forward-looking indicators suggest that we're going to produce even less homes going forward. And what all this means is that the rental crisis is just going to keep getting worse, because we've got housing demand running so far ahead of housing supply that basically, we're going to have renters forced to pay higher rents, thrown into group housing or thrown onto the streets. And that's basically a direct result of the federal government's immigration program. It's an absolute disgrace.
Indeed, that's the way I would see it. And the Prime Minister's come out with an announcement in the last 24 hours, which, if you toss it up, it's a bit of a word salad with all of the trendy words: green hydrogen, solar panels, that kind of thing. But none of it is addressed toward the business of providing more houses, I notice.
Yeah, well, I mean, they always tinker around the edges. They say, they've set these obviously lofty targets. Just to give some perspective, the highest year of construction ever in Australia's history is about 221,000. And that was, I think, 2017. And that was when obviously we built all those shoddy apartments, which we're still paying the price for. We put up all those, really poor quality apartments across Sydney, Melbourne, etc. And a lot of them end up being faulty, and we're paying the price now. But we only built 220,000 homes that year, and that was the national record. We've never done that before. And then the government just came out and said, "Oh, you know what? We're going to do 240,000." And they just announced it. And it's like, well, how are we going to do that? We've got high interest rates. You've got a 40% increase in building costs since the pandemic started. You've got builders can't make a profit. They're going broke left, right and centre. And then finally, you've got builders competing with state government infrastructure projects now for tradies and labour, etc. So this whole notion that we can magically ramp up supply to keep up with this population demand is just totally ridiculous when we've got these economic conditions that we've got of high interest rates, high materials costs, etc. So look, it hasn't been thought through. It was just basically, we'll just we'll bring the people in, and then we'll hope that we can build it. And then when people started getting angsty about it and concerned about it, they just made up a target and said, don't worry, we'll set this lofty target and that'll appease everyone. The problem is the chickens are coming home to roost a year later, and we're now seeing that the actual construction figures are missing their targets by about 91,000, which is just massive miss. And that's why we've got this unbelievable rental crisis, and it's just going to keep getting worse. And the solution, as I say every week, Mike, is they've got to cut immigration. They've got to cut it hard to a level that's below the nation's ability to build homes and infrastructure. Otherwise, the situation is going to keep getting worse.
Because even if we aim for ultra shoddy, still can't come up with the numbers, Leith.
No, that's right. Well, I mean, we did it briefly. Well, we didn't even get to 240. We got to 221,000 at the very highest year in history. In the second half of last decade, about 2017. And look where it got us. We're dealing with the flammable cladding. We're dealing with the mascot towers, opal towers, etc. The faulty foundations, leaky balconies, all those sorts of things. And it's basically left a whole bunch of people who've bought a whole bunch of very poorly built apartments in the financial black hole, and then also spending literally millions and millions of dollars across the board in rectification costs, etc., trying to fix these things that shouldn't have been built in the first place. And the solution, instead of trying to just cool everything down a bit, run a lower population growth so you can actually build some quality and do it slowly, they've decided to try and speed it up to levels we've never seen before, which just means that even if we did get there, Mike, we're going to have even worse quality than we had last time because they're going to have to build this stuff so quickly that it's just going to get slapped up. And we're going to get shoeboxes.
Leith, appreciate your comments, appreciate your realism and candour. Thanks for that.
Yeah, cheers, Mike. Speak to you next time.
Leith van Onselen, who is Chief Economist at the MB Fund, among other things.
Dabble.